In the early 4th century, the Roman Emperor Constantine granted official legal status to a small, upstart religious organization. Unbeknownst to him and the people of Rome at the time, this small group would go on to become the single most influential and powerful organization in all of history, an entity whose power spanned across all of Europe. This organization was the Catholic Church, and in the 1600s a single man went against the ideas of the Church. His name was Galileo Galilei, and his defiance of the Church enabled the works of the many scientists who followed him and changed the relationship between science and religion forever. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was the dominant force in Europe. Its power was so great that mighty kings such as Charlemagne would bow down before it. But by the 16th century, this power had begun to wane. The work of Protestant reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin had caused the Church's grip on Europe to deteriorate. The Church reacted to this with the Counter-Reformation. The goals of the Counter-Reformation were to stop the spread of Protestantism and reform the Catholic Church from within. During this time, the Catholic Church was on a constant lookout for heretics, or people who expressed ideas that were contrary to the Church's doctrine. The Church was concerned that these people could furthermore undermine the Church's power and inspire more people to leave the Church. This rationale leads to Spanish and Roman Inquisitions, which resulted in the deaths and tortures of thousands of alleged heretics. It was a time of secrets and conspiring behind closed doors, as both heretics and the Church plotted against each other. The Roman Catholic Church that Galileo faced was a vicious machine that was willing to do anything to protect itself. Galileo Galilei was born in Pisa, Italy in 1564 as the son of a merchant. He initially began his studies in medicine at the University of Pisa, but in 1583 he was introduced to mathematics and the physical sciences. Galileo ended his medical studies and became a student of physics under a notable Aristotelian scientist. In 1585, Galileo dropped out of the university due to financial difficulties. In the following years, Galileo began writing and giving lectures about mathematics and quickly built up a reputation, even earning a teaching position at the University of Pisa. When his father died in 1591, Galileo had to move to a new, more lucrative position at the University of Padua, a post that he held for 18 years and was one of the best times of his life. In 1604, Galileo, for the first time, publicly argued in favor of the Copernican system. The Copernican system is a heliocentric model of the universe where the solar system revolves around the sun. The Aristotelian and Ptolemaic systems, on the other hand, are geocentric, where the universe revolves around the Earth. The Catholic Church officially supported the Ptolemaic system because of various statements in the Bible that implied that the stars moved and the Earth was fixed. However, the geocentric model often did not correspond with observations of the skies. For centuries, rather than looking to other models such as the heliocentric one, scientists made up complicated mechanics such as epicycles in order to reconcile their observations with what the Church had said. It wasn't until Copernicus that the heliocentric model was discussed. For some time, Galileo avoided publicly declaring his support for the Copernican view of the solar system. He knew that it would get him in hot water with the Church. This changed with the invention of the telescope by Hans Lippershey. Galileo heard of the invention and began constructing his own. His telescope was more powerful than the ones that came before it. Perhaps the biggest innovation that he made for the telescope was its usage. Galileo was one of the first to point the telescopes toward the sky. The discoveries that he made with the telescope changed the course of history forever. It was these discoveries that ultimately pushed him to go against the Church's doctrine in the interest of science. Galileo's initial discoveries using the telescope were detailed in his work Starry Messenger. It chronicled discoveries such as the moon's imperfect surface and the presence of individual stars in the galaxy. The most important discovery was of Jupiter's moons. The fact that the moons were orbiting Jupiter as the planet moved through the sky offered an explanation for how Earth's own moon wasn't left behind as Earth moved through the sky. The Starry Messenger was met with controversy. As the debate raged on, Galileo made more discoveries with his telescopes, such as the phases of Venus and sunspots, which further weakened the Ptolemaic argument. The phases of Venus told Galileo that Venus must be orbiting the Sun, not the Earth. Galileo also observed the sunspots regularly and drew them. His drawings showed the location of the sunspots changing. Galileo figured that the Sun must be rotating as well. When combined with the other mechanics of motion offered by the Copernican system, the motion of sunspots made sense. With these findings, Galileo found that he could no longer stand down and let the Church spread its false theory. He was ready to begin aggressively supporting the Copernican theory. However, he still had obstacles in his way. Galileo began delving into theology, looking for some ways to justify his work from a religious standpoint. He composed a series of letters on this matter, the most well-known being addressed to Grand Duchess Christina, which contained his theological defense for his work. He said that the Bible had no place in deciding how the natural world works. In doing so, he interpreted the Bible for himself and by extension denounced the Church's interpretation to the world. The letters began to circulate, and it soon captured the Church's attention. In 1616, Galileo was called in front of the Church officials and was instructed not to teach or spread Copernican ideas anymore. However, Galileo refused to be shut up. He searched for ways to get past the Church's ban. Luckily for him, he had a supporter and prominent church member, Cardinal Maffeo Barberini. Barberini would later become Pope Urban VIII. Galileo regularly met with the Pope about his condemnation, which eventually led to a momentous meeting in 1623. Although the exact words said by the Pope to Galileo are unknown, many accounts of the meeting suggest that the Pope had given Galileo permission to write about his theories, as long as they were hypothetical. Galileo immediately got to work. In 1632, Galileo's greatest work was published. Dialogue on the two chief world systems was Galileo's great exploration of the Ptolemaic and Copernican models. When it reached the Church, it quickly incited a response. In spite of the promise that he had made, Galileo couldn't stand to let his beliefs be bottled up. He tried to prove the Copernican theory correct in his writings. In doing so, he went against the Church's attempt to keep the Copernican theory under wraps. The Church called Galileo back to Rome with the intention of silencing him once and for all. At this point in his life, Galileo was an old man who was ill. He knew that the Church would insist he take back his words, but he refused to give in. He tried to put off the trial citing ill health, but after a few months, he had no choice but to go. At his trial, Galileo was threatened with burning at the stake and other forms of torture and violent punishment. Eventually, he had to take back his ideas and his years of work and was sentenced to house arrest. There was a more personal note to the Galileo affair as well. Although Pope Urban VIII had admired Galileo's intelligence and work, he himself was in favor of the Ptolemaic model. He had previously been against the first condemnation of Galileo because he supported Galileo's right to prove a scientific theory without the Church stepping in. However, when he received the final product, Dialogue, he was enraged. The book was written as a scientific discussion between three men, with two favoring the Copernican system and one supporting the Ptolemaic. In Urban's view, the book was utterly biased toward the Copernican system and presented a much stronger argument for the Copernican system rather than the Ptolemaic. The cherry on top was Galileo's choice of names. The man representing the Ptolemaic model was named Simplicio, which was taken from a discredited scientist named Simplicius. It was also very close to the Italian word for simpleton. When Urban saw his own view being represented by a discredited and simple man, he felt that Galileo was mocking him. Galileo's punishment may have been boiled down to a bruised ego. The ordeal that Galileo had gone through would have been enough to break the spirit of most men, but Galileo refused to let the Church keep him from the search for his truth. He returned home and continued experimenting and writing about the sciences. He made many important physical discoveries during this time, many of which paved the way for Newton later on. In 1642, Galileo died. The Galileo affair was a big moment in the scientific revolution, a moment that changed the relationship between science and religion forever. Before Galileo, scientists would try their best not to upset the Church. Copernicus himself did not publish his work on heliocentrism until he was on his deathbed. Galileo, on the other hand, was very bold in his support. He repeatedly defied the Church's orders and also tried to interpret scripture for himself. He also chose to write in Italian instead of Latin, which made his ideas accessible to everyone. Inspired by Galileo, scientists became bolder in their work, and as the Church's power continued to diminish, science rose to prominence. Galileo also changed the scientific method with his experimentations and observations. Without Galileo, the many scientists who came after him might have never been able to publish their work, and their innovations wouldn't have materialized. The fundamental technologies around us would not exist. He paved the way for NASA and rockets and cars and computers and everything else. The biggest testament to how important Galileo was to science are all of the monuments and objects named in his honor. In 1989, NASA launched a space probe designed to go to Jupiter and its moons. Its name was Galileo, in honor of the man who first traveled to Jupiter's moons with his vision, the man who saw the world for what it really is and was not afraid to speak his mind. The world as we know it would not exist without the man from Pisa who stood up to the most powerful group in the entire world.